So I want to go into what I call like my kind of laundry list of codependent tendencies. And this is my bad. I was actually going to print you all a piece of paper for you to have that. And I'll give it to you guys, but I don't have it with me. So I'll go slow through these because usually I've got a list and you can actually just look at it. But I go through this laundry list. It's not exhaustive. I'm constantly adding to it.
And this is attachment styles?
This is codependency work. This is a lot of codependency work. All right, so we'll just start at the top. So lack of relationship with self or low self-worth. So when I first started doing my codependency recovery, I remember the very first thing my first therapist said to me when she was talking about like low self-esteem or low self-worth. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I work in advertising, I'm extroverted, I have so many friends, I have all this support, like I have all these amazing relationships. And she's like, you're misunderstanding what I'm talking about. Well, I'm not talking about, are you extroverted? Do you have a good community? I'm talking about, do you have a relationship with yourself? Do you know who the fuck you are? Like, do you have a strong sense of inner understanding, inner knowledge, inner love, inner respect, right? Capital S self. That's why I keep saying that, right? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I've never thought about that, right? So we're not necessarily, when I say that stuff, this idea of, I say self-understanding, self-knowledge, right? Some of us are going to be on different points on that spectrum, but for sure, a kickoff point for codependent ways of relating is not having a solid sense of self-understanding, self-love, self-knowledge, right? Constant state of denial. So the thing about codependency, which is interesting, is that you have to have a certain amount of denial for the behaviors to continue, okay? So it's one of those things that's like once you know something, you can't unknow. Right? I could be a people-pleasing martyr all day until somebody like in therapy called me out on it, and then I was like, oh shit. And now every time I do it, because I still do it, but now I can't do it without that like outside thing going like, you're doing it again. Do you know what I mean? So it's a little bit of you can't unknow it once you know it, right? Yep.
Can't unring that bell.
That's right. Black and white thinking, emotional extremes, compulsiveness. So this is the thing about codependency. It is a behavioral addiction. Codependent behaviors, codependent tendencies are addictive tendencies, okay? We have a real way of kind of demonizing people in our culture who have substance abuse issues, when in actuality, other people and buying shit is just as much of an addiction as booze, but it's socially sanctioned, right? Here's the thing, any addiction, I don't care what addiction we're talking about. Again, drugs, alcohol, porn, sex, shopping, again, people, right? They all serve the same purpose: to numb, to hide, to soothe anxiety. That's what they're there for, right? They're ways that we learn how to make ourselves feel better about something when we don't feel good, right? And we don't know what that something is. That's different for everybody, but it is for sure a skill that we learn, oh, this works. This turns it down a little bit, right? I might need more next time, which is what all addictions, we need more and more and more to keep getting the same response. Codependency is the same. So I say that to say, you know, we're all in it together. Like, we're all in some way self-medicating because we don't have that solid sense of, I know who I am and I'm okay. I'm good. I got me, right? Most of us were not raised to embody that feeling, right? Most of our parents don't embody that feeling. Most of our grandparents don't embody that feeling, right? Again, look at the systems we live within. What I was saying last night, the systems that we live within would not continue. Capitalism could not continue as a structure, unquestioned and unchecked, if everybody had a solid sense of self and wasn't buying shit all the time to fill the void. Do you know what I mean? Like, think about it. So an over-involvement in someone else's life, which underneath that is also detaching and not focusing on yourself or losing yourself in relationships, right? We hide from ourselves by focusing on other people. I don't have to look at myself so long as I'm focused on somebody else. I don't have to do my own work so long as my finger's pointed at the work you need to do. I don't have to take 100% accountability for my shit so long as I'm saying you're the bad guy in this scenario, or you're the fucked up one, or you need help doing this, or you.
Did you say hide from ourselves to what?
Personal accountability. Now, this is a lot of my Al-Anon work. I am hardcore, Danae and I both. It is something that we, like, it's the hill that we're willing to die on, that personal accountability is the #1 component to healing. And it's hard, and it's icky, and it feels like shit, and it makes us feel like awful, right? Because it activates our ego in all of the ways, right? But in every single circumstance, there is something that we can own. In every single dynamic, there's always something we can own, right? Even if, and I've heard a lot of pushback on this from people, especially people, you know, DV, violent. Now listen, I'm not saying like, okay, if I'm a child and I'm sexually abused, that somehow I have to own something. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about as an adult in a relationship where you are actively contributing to a dynamic, right? That's what I'm talking about. But even in situations, let's say I'm in an abusive dynamic as an adult, I'm in an abusive dynamic for 10 years. This is not to victim blame, but it is to say there are two partners co-creating something together. We are involved in a dynamic and in a dance together. And I have seen actually a huge amount of empowerment come from people who were even on the receiving end of abuse saying, here's the way that I contributed to this dynamic. Because it's actually, it takes away your power when you say, that person did all the things to me. I'm giving them all my power. Even if it's hard to say, here's the way that I contributed, that actually is an act of reclaiming a sense of power and autonomy. And like, I have the ability to make a change, right? And that's not actually the way that a lot of even our current psychology works with like abuse as an example, right? Struggling with planning and doing for yourself. So I call this one like now I'm not talking about necessarily like making my dentist appointment every 6 months. Like that shit I'm fine at doing, right?
Good for you.
But I'm good at that, you know, typically. But when it comes to like things that are nurturing for my soul, I'm a lot better at making sure everybody else is good than making sure that I have a committed practice to coming back to self, right? And doing things for me. I don't need to explain it to anybody. It doesn't need to make fucking sense. I don't have to ask permission. I don't have to apologize, right? A lot of us are just not great at that. And it's not that we don't love making people feel good. There's something wrong with that. But is it balanced? Is it at the detriment of ourselves, right? And by the way, you're not going to say yes to every single one of these, just like the quiz, right? Some people are going to be on different extremes. And I also like to say what I have found is that in like my relationship with my mom, for example, I will say yes on this list to like, oh yeah, I can see how I struggle with numbers like 6, 7, and 9. And in my relationship with John, it might be like 13 and 14. And in my relationship with my best friend, it might be like 1, 2, and 6. They also show up differently because different people trigger and activate different responses in us because they have their own shit, right? So this isn't like blanket. A fear of abandonment and rejection. So I say this is the through line. All codependent ways of relating are established on this base level of fear of abandonment or rejection. All of them, right? People pleasing, right? I'm worried about how you're gonna think about me if I don't people please, right? And so I'm gonna kind of alter myself. I'm gonna potentially self-abandon so that you see me in a certain way and you don't leave, right? Or like martyring. Like I'm gonna martyr myself so that you stay with me because I'm of such value to you, you could never leave, right? Like you can start to look at every one of these behaviors and see how the fear is that through line of why we do it, right? And it's not to blame ourselves, it's just to have an understanding of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I can see the fear in that, right? Feeling like a doormat. So this comes from having poor boundaries, right? And I talk a lot about this in a specific kind of boundaries workshop, but this feeling of a doormat is a lot of times linked to the same kind of martyr vibe, right? A desire to rescue, save, or fix. So a lot of us have equated being needed with being loved. Not the same thing, right? So we, again, we make sure that people won't leave us by making sure that we are invaluable to them.
Ooh.
And by the way, there's never one person in a relationship that's codependent. We're all codependent in some way.
I thought it was me.
We're all codependent.
Yeah.
That's why I say we're all codependent. It's a societal thing. It might show up differently than for you than for him, or manifest differently, right? But the bottom line, we're all acting out of fear to not lose attachment. And that in and of itself is a codependent way of relating to other people, right? Reactivity. So this is an interesting one because there is this quote that I love. So there's this woman, Pia Melody, who's like an OG in the codependency world. And she has this quote from one of her books where she says, codependents underreact, they overreact, but rarely do they act. And what I love about that, well, it's so spot on because we're on one extreme or the other, right? We have black and white. That's typically how we exist. It's fine, it's no big deal, sweep it under the rug. This is not a big deal. I shouldn't be upset about this. It's no big deal. Until something stupid happens, that's probably not even a big deal. And suddenly we're like, it's a big fucking deal, right? A lot of us do that. Not everybody, but that's very common, right? And why is that? Because we don't actually have the skills to act, which is from a solid, grounded sense of self saying, hey, that thing that you said really hurt my feelings and it wasn't cool, right? And if the other person says, well, and they get all defensive and you go, listen, I'm not trying to argue this with you. I'm just letting you know I didn't like it and I don't want to be treated that way, right? Which would be an action. Hey, I feel really underappreciated or undervalued when you do X, Y, and Z. And it's not about how they respond to the information. It's just about saying, coming from my grounded sense of self, I can feel that feeling. I can now know where that feeling's come from, and then I can verbalize it. And I'm not doing it out of fear or trying to like manipulate the situation. A difficulty with intimate relationships. So at the end of the day, there is a kind of glass ceiling, if you will, or just a wall where when I am not acting out of a state of authenticity, there is only so intimate I can get. There's only like so intimate that we can be with each other when I am not acting out of an authentic state. Because intimacy requires authenticity. Authenticity requires vulnerability. If I'm acting out of fear, I'm not going to be truly vulnerable or authentic. There's always going to be a part of me that's a little fake. Not rocking the boat because I'm worried about your reaction. That's not authentic. Now I get it. Again, I'm not blaming. I know where it comes from. Like maybe somebody is very explosive or like I understand the why, but we still have to be able to hold ourselves accountable and say, but that's what I'm doing, right? I realize that when I do that thing, I'm choosing to self-abandon, not be authentic, and there's only so intimate I can get with this person. And again, this is all intimate relationships, right? Not just romantic. And so we have to kind of take a lot of risk and say, okay, here's what I'm not gonna do anymore. Here's how I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna show this side of myself, or I'm gonna do this thing, or I'm not gonna fix it, or whatever. And I'm gonna see the information that comes back to me when I hold myself in integrity and I don't self-abandon. That's fucking scary and really hard because our inner child is going, they're gonna leave, they're gonna blow up, this is unsafe, you're gonna get left, the attachment's gonna sever, and it could happen. It could happen. It does happen. You know, I say that especially with codependency work, when you start really doing this work, I call it like, John says, like shaking the tree, I think you use, and I always say like a pasta strainer. All your relationships go into the strainer. Some of them fall through. They do. They cannot tolerate you having a grounded sense of self. It's a mirror that they don't want to look in. And if they don't want to, we shouldn't be making them. It's their life. But you activate that with them. And then a lot of times they're like, I don't want this anymore, right? And you changing changes the dynamic. And they're like, I didn't sign up for a change dynamic. I'm in this for this dynamic. Who the fuck are you to change the dynamic, right? But we have to allow them that kind of choice, you know? But that is the fear. Chronic lying or deception, usually to yourself, but also the act of not speaking up or expressing ourselves honestly is deception. I'm withholding information from somebody. So like if you have a chronic way of doing something or saying something that hurts my feelings or makes me feel unwanted or unneeded or whatever, insert your thing here, right? And I am not honest about that with you, I'm acting out of fear to maintain the attachment, I'm not being authentic, and I'm actually being deceptive. There's a deceptive quality to not being honest about our relationship, like what's going on, right? And it's like I usually, as I do this, I give like little trigger warnings, like, I'm about to call you a manipulator, trigger warning, about to call you a liar, trigger warning, you know? But it's like, ugh, like you were saying, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You're like, ah, shit. Yeah, I know, me too. Rage, bitterness. Oh wait, let me go back. Sorry. Lack of trust in yourself or others. So again, this I'm acting out of fear. Again, this is a lack of trust in other people, myself. I do not trust that I've got me and I will be okay no matter what. And so instead, I act out of fear in my relationships. If I had a solid sense of, yeah, it's gonna hurt, but I know that at the end of the day, I'm good, I got me, I would a lot less, nobody's 100%, I would a lot less be acting out of fear and making sure that attachments are staying how they are, right? So a lot of this has lack of trust. And I would also add on this, a lack of trust in something bigger. A lack of trust in, I am held, I'm okay. Doesn't have to be religion, doesn't have to be dogma. It can be a sense of there is an energy that's higher, bigger than me, right? Danae said to me one time in AA, because she did the AA route, that, because obviously AA has a lot of like religious and spiritual undertones, and somebody said, well, I'm atheist, how do I engage in this? And the woman said, that's fine. You don't have to believe in God. But this is the question she always asks these people that say this. She'll say, I want you to go into the ocean and try to stop the waves. And then just tell me that there's no power greater than you out there, even if it's the earth, right? Like, of course, you're not this, like we're all this, and there's something, even if it's just the way that Mother Earth works, that's larger than us. But the fact is too, there's a lack of trust in, I'm okay. And that's learned. That's learned. We don't come out the womb not trusting that we're held. We come out the womb and then we learn that we're not safe. Our caretakers aren't safe, right? Our attachments aren't safe. And so we start to develop this like, I am not safe. That becomes our internal reality. And then it becomes really hard to shake that. And then what we do is we perpetuate that that belief by our codependent behaviors, by convincing ourselves, see what happens. If I don't make sure the boat's not rocked, they leave. See, right? Or we unconsciously get into partnerships or relationships with people that activate our wounding to just reinforce our false beliefs, right? Not consciously, but unconsciously. Rage, bitterness, hatred, fear, depression, anxiety, helplessness, despair, guilt. I put all of these very heavy words on one line for a reason. So what I was saying earlier about how addictions all serve the same purpose, right? To soothe anxiety, to kind of hide, to numb. Most of us, unless you had a well before their time kind of upbringing, most of us were not taught to be with very big, very scary, very uncomfortable emotions, right? A lot of us, and this isn't to blame parents, but a lot of us came from, oh my God, stop being so dramatic. Oh, go to your room until you've calmed down, right? Like, suck it up, like life's hard. You should be grateful for what you have, right? Like a lot of kind of dismissive narratives around like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and that there's something wrong with you for feeling big, uncomfortable, scary things. So whatever that looked like for you, the bottom line is the outcome is still the same. We have no fucking idea how to be with ourselves when things are big and hard and scary. And a lot of work, like as a therapist, is really teaching people that skill, because it's a skill, right? I am like despair and all of these anguishing feelings that we're all gonna feel in our lives. I gotta make it stop. How do I make it stop, right? So I distract myself. I throw myself into work. I numb it through focusing on my kid who's having a hard time at their work, right? Or I hide behind this new relationship or whatever. We do this. How can I get out of this feeling, right? Rather than actually making it a practice of meditating on and being with that feeling.
What do you think of the opposite? You guys are
So hyper-independence is just the opposite side of the same coin. Mm-hmm. It's still a way to control what feels uncontrollable. Mm-hmm. And for people, well, I'm the same way, who feel more in control when I don't have to look at or rely on anybody else, because I'm the only one that I can trust and rely on. Mm-hmm. No one's ever fucking been there for me. I can't trust in anybody. They're always gonna leave. They're always gonna disappoint me. They're always gonna fuck me over. I know that I got my back. Mm-hmm. That's still a way to distance, control that amount of vulnerability and intimacy that I allow into my life, because that shit's scary and I know where it goes. It leads to heartbreak, disappointment.
But then it does, and so then
My point of we keep reinforcing.
You prove it to yourself every time. Like,
Yes.
Well, I was right.
Yes. And a lot of times,
So why
it's a
change?
lot of unconscious stuff that we do that the ego seeks out because the ego has to be right. The number one thing the ego needs is to be right. And so the crazy thing about that idea is that the ego will actually do things that are hurtful and fucked up just to prove to itself a theory. Like, I am not safe, I'm the only one I can trust, just to be right. See? I told you. I told you, and most of the time we're not even conscious of it. It's like acting underneath the surface, right? Until we know.
Right.
And then once we know, sometimes we can't unknow. And we start to be like, oh, interesting, why am I doing this thing? Or why am I reaching out to this person or not reaching out to this person? We might develop a little bit more of an avoidant attachment style, right? Which tends to go hand in hand with the more hyper independence. The kind of codependency side of this coin tends to go hand in hand with a little bit more of the anxiety or the anxious way of relating, right? Two sides of the same coin. It's all just ways to mitigate anxiety at the end of the day, right? Discomfort around being close, discomfort around trusting somebody, right? I don't trust that I will be okay and I will be held, so let me do this, right? Now, there's a long journey to kind of unpack that, and there's strategies and all kinds of things to do, but there is a reason for it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's usually the reason. So that's why I say, like, hyper-independence and codependency, at the end of whether we're talking about avoidant attachment, anxious, it doesn't, all of this stuff serves the same purpose. It's to soothe anxiety that comes up from the potential of disappointment, abandonment, rejection, right?
Yeah.
We just all reach for different things. And it's worked for us, and so we go back for more. And it gets stronger and stronger, and the skill and the tool becomes bigger and bigger because we keep proving it to ourselves.